Hello, my little explorers. Today we are going to learn about a very exciting things. We will learn about how do plants reproduce. Now, you must be wondering, we have so many plants, so many trees, so many flowers, so many greenery around us. How does this come? How does this all the roses, the marigolds, the sunflowers, how do they take birth? Do they have mama or papa? Do they have their parents, or how are they born? So let's learn about how do plants reproduce. Now flowers, as you know, are the most attractive part of plants. I love flowers, definitely, and I'm sure that all my little explorers like you also love the flowers. So we love the plants or the bushes or the shrubs which have beautiful colorful flowers in them, and they have colorful petals and wonderful fragrances. Like I like to do first thing in the morning is that when I step out of my house, I like to stop and smell the fragrance from the wonderful flowers around me. Or sometimes when I'm walking in the evening in my garden, I love the fragrance of jasmine or ratrani. So these flowers, they really fill my heart with joy. So we love to see them, we love to touch them, we love to feel them, we love to smell them. We should never pluck the flowers, but right, explorers? So flowers that grow into fruits which contain seeds, and plants, they can be divided into two main types. First is flowering plants such as roses, sunflowers and marigolds. So these are your roses, beautiful rose flowers as you know. Then we have beautiful sunflowers. Oh, I love a field full of sunflowers. Sometimes they are so huge, they are as big as our faces. Then I love marigolds. We often use them in garlands or in puja. Then there are some non-flowering plants also, like pine. Pine is very commonly found in India, whereby you see pine trees like that. So they don't have flowers, or you see flowers like spruce. Trees like spruce trees. Now again, these spruce trees, they do not have any flowers, but still they are trees or plants nevertheless. So when we are talking about reproduction in plants, a very important component of reproduction in plants is flowers. So typically, a typical flower is made up of four different parts. What are these parts? They are petals, sepals, stamens, and carpel. First, let me just tell you about them, then I'll explain them to you by diagram. So sepals, they are usually green in color. They are the outermost parts of a flower. Then petals, they are brightly colored to attract animals for pollination. I'm sure you know about petals. We all see rose petals or petals of shoe flowers, petal of hibiscus. So these are all petal. Then stamen. Stamen is the male part of the flower. It has a filament with an anther on top. Pollens are generally produced in anther. Let me show you anther. So anther, filament with anther. So see, these are anthers. These are the top of the anther. So pollens are usually, look at this diagram. Let me show you. See, these are the filaments, and the top of this filaments is anther, and this is the stamen. Let's come back. So pollens are produced in the anther. These anthers, they have the pollen. Then carpel is the female part of the flower. Now a plant or flower is a beautiful thing. It has male parts also and female parts also. Usually as humans, we are either men or women. We are boys or girls. So we have male parts or female parts. But flowers, sometimes they have both the parts. So carpel is the female part of the flower. It includes an ovary containing ovules, a style and a stigma. Pistil is the collective term for carpels. So many carpels together are known as pistil. And after fertilization, the ovary grows into a fruit and the ovule grows into a seed. So what happens is that when there is a fertilization, I'll tell you more about fertilization later. So when there is fertilization, the ovary, it grows into a fruit. And this ovule, the ovule inside the fruit, that turns into a seed. So you know we plant trees to grow the flower. Let me first show you a pistil also, how it looks. Is still in real plant. So in this part, this thing is pistil. Okay, this is the pistil and this is the filament. Like we talked about, this is the filament and this is the anther and this is the pistil. So it has both male and female parts both. Okay, so let's move on. Now pollen from the anther of a plant. Now before I come to this, let me show you all the parts first in a diagram. So these are the petals. This is very commonly understood by all my explorers. So I'm sure you know what a petal is. It is used to attract insects into the flower. They might be scented like rose petals. They are very fragrant. Mogra petals, jasmine petals, they are very fragrant. Then this is the stamen. This is the pistil. This is the sepal. They protect the flower when the flower is developing from a bud. So you see that it is a very protective green color protective thing. Now let me show all of this to you in a real plant. So see, this is a real flower photo. In this you can see this is the sepal, this is the petal, the stamen and the carpel. So these are the important parts of a plant. Now how does the pollen, now this is the anther, how does the pollen from the anther, from the pollen from the male parts goes to the female part? Let's learn that. Pollen from the anther of a plant is carried by the wind or by insects. So sometimes it flies in the wind or sometimes insects carry them to the stigma of a flower for fertilization. And this process is known as pollination. The pollen grain passes through the style and unite with the egg cells in the ovule. This process is called fertilization. And once fertilized, the ovary changes into fruit and ovule into seeds. So I've already told you, first it becomes a fruit and inside the fruit we can see seeds. So let me show this to you with an example. Now seeds in the fruits can create new plants. Of course we know, what do we do to grow new plants? We plant the seeds in the ground. And when pollen from a plant stamen is transferred to the stigma of the same plant, it is known as self-pollination. Now, if you remember, I told you many plants, they have both male and female parts. So, when pollen from a plant stamen is transferred to stigma of the same plant, it is known as self-pollination. So, let me show you the stamen. So, this is the stamen male part and it has to reach stigma. This is the female part. Now it will not jump from here automatically, or the plant cannot move its limbs. Like for example, a man or a woman can move their hands to eat or touch any part of their body. A human being basically can move any limb of their body to touch it. But plants cannot do that. So how will the pollen reach from stamen to this stigma? It will either go by wind or insects carry it. So if the pollen from this stamen reaches this stigma, this is both in the same plant, this is both in the same flower, so it is known as self-pollination. Now let me explain the cross section of the flowers first, so that before I move on to the next topic. Now stamen, it is the male part of the flower consisting of filament and anthers. So this part is called filament and the top is called anthers. Stigma, it is covered with a sticky substance which helps pollen grains to stick. So if pollen flies from here, it will come to stigma, it will hold it. It is the female part. Then style, this is the style. Style is nothing but the stem of the stigma. Then petals, these are the outside petals. Pistil, or the female part of the flower. So this is the pistil. Anther, as I told you, it is top of the stamen. It contains the pollen. Filament is the stalk of the anther, stem of the anther. Ovule, the fertilization takes place inside the ovule. So pollen will go inside the ovule and this is where the fertilization process takes place. Ovary is the seed box where the seeds are made and this is the sepal. Now you learned about self-pollination. When stamen from the male plant of when pollen from the male part of the same plant goes to the stigma of the female part of the same plant, it is called self-pollination. Now when pollen from a plant stamen is transferred to the stigma of a different plant, it is known as cross-pollination. Now suppose the stamen from this flower flew to some other plant and got into the stigma of that plant, it would be cross-pollination. Now by doing cross-pollination, we can produce a variety of plants. Now you must have seen that you get different color roses. Some roses are red, some roses are yellow, some roses are pink, and some roses are multicolor. This happens because of cross-pollination. Now if you take pollen from a red rose and put it in the stigma of a red rose, it will give you red color rose only. But by chance, if you take pollen or this anthers from the red rose and put it in a yellow rose, then it might create another color of the rose. So by cross pollination, we can produce a variety of plants. Pollination, as I told you, occurs in several ways. Some plants rely on birds, insects, animals, or the wind to pollinate them. Now, birds and insects such as bees, butterflies, and flies are attracted to the sweet nectar at the base of the petals. So, on the base of the petals, there is this sweet nectar. This is sweet. It smells also very sweet, and it tastes also sweet to the insects. When they come to feed on a plant, the sticky pollen gets stuck to them when they rub against the stamen. So when they are rubbing against the stamen, it gets stuck in under their feet or their body. As they move to another flower to feed, some of the pollen falls off their body onto the stigma of the new plant. Now let me show you in this diagram. See, in your book it has shown. See, when collecting nectar, an insect brushes against stamens and pollen sticks to his leg or body. So this bee will come to this flower, it will sit on the flower. So it will touch the stamen and the pollen will stick to the body and legs of this bee. Next, this bee will go to some another flower because the bee wants to eat little bit more. So when the insect visits another flower, pollen brushes from its body against the stigma. So the pollen which was stuck on the body or legs of the bee, that will touch the stigma. Stigma was the female part of the flower. So the pollen will automatically touch the stigma. Now the pollen passes down the stigma to the ovum. So this is the ovum where the seeds are fertilized. And when the seeds are ripe, they disperse. They will throw out in the atmosphere. And if they land on moist, light ground, a new plant will grow. Wow. See, look at this magic. What is happening? There is pollen in this plant. A bee comes, touches that pollen. It goes to another plant. Here the pollen touches the female part of this plant, then it goes down, the pollen goes down inside the ovum. Here seeds are created, and by wind or by any other reason the seeds are thrown away onto the ground, and when they land on the ground, and if the ground is moist or if rain falls, it will a new plant will be created. So this is how plants reproduce. Now, animals are also often attracted to strong scent and bright colors of plants. These animal pollinators also help the plants as they go from plant to plant in the search of food. Now, some animals, they like to eat the plants, or they like to eat the leaves of the plants, for example, goats or cows. So while grazing also, they pollinate just the way bees or insects do. Now, sometimes the wind picks up the pollen from one plant and transfers it to another, resulting into wind pollination. Sometimes what happens that when the wind is too strong, the flowers will shake and the pollen will fly, and it will go from one plant to the another plant, and this is how also pollination occurs. Plants pollinated by wind often have long stamens and pistils. They may not be brightly colored, they have small petals or none at all. Because now these kind of plants which depend on wind pollination, they don't want to attract the insects. So they might not have brightly colored petals, or they might not have a fragrance or anything. They have long stamens so that whenever the wind blows, they can shake and throw their pollens into the another plant. Now, in next video, we'll learn about creating new plants from the seeds. So please click on the next video, and please subscribe, like, and drop me a comment if you want to ask anything about pollination till now. Thank you.